All of you couldn't buy it, and I read it in one night without putting it down. So that tells you something about the nature of the book. It is clearly unput-downable. Of the 4 books Ravi's written, I've read 3 and enjoyed all of them. What is interesting is that, many of us work in large companies, corporations, banks, insurance companies, and manufacturing companies. But most books that writers write will be about hippies in Kulu and Manali or some artists or something, as if there is no excitement in our lives. And I think this is a point of departure with Ravi. He kind of captures the excitement in the lives of many of us who spend 9 to 5, and in the case of Ravi's characters, who spend 9 to 9 working in their banks. The second thing that I find very fascinating is he talks about corrosive corruption. We always talk about politicians being corrupt. We never kind of admit that, in fact, there are different degrees of corruption in the private sector. And what is interesting about Ravi's approach is that he points out that many of this doesn't start as corruption. In fact, it starts as merely aggressive pursuit of promotions. In other words, as people are aggressively pursuing their careers, in that aggressive pursuit to meet the numbers, to meet the goals, to meet the objectives, the corrosive corruption starts. They start cutting corners. So it starts off as a very innocent thing. I mean, who wouldn't want to get promoted? Who wouldn't want to increase sales? Who wouldn't want to have a successful branch or a successful cluster or a successful department? Everybody would. But in that process, he brings out how, if you're not careful, if the consequences are what you're worried about, in other words, if you're not following the path of dharma where you have to do the right thing, irrespective of the consequences, but you are slowly getting into adharma as you're worried about getting the victorious consequences, irrespective of the means, that is how corruption, corrosion of the soul starts. The next thing that he does, which I find fascinating, is he has a very intricate understanding of the way multiple departments, multiple divisions, multiple functions, HR, finance, sales, etc. work, the kind of creative tension that exists in the lives of people in a private sector corporation. We all know that in every company, operations and sales fight. HR is always difficult. I mean, that he brings that out very, very well, so we can all relate to it, and he does it with very quick, broad brush strokes. It doesn't take much time to kind of set the stage for those things. Of course, he is, at the end of the day, a thriller writer, so he has to weave in some crime and espionage and that kind of stuff into it. And we all know that, particularly the modern financial world, the modern telecom world, all of this allows for a lot of chicanery. There is money laundering, there is misuse of cell phones for terrorism. There's a whole host of things that can happen in the outside world as a consequence of the actions of corporations and certainly of banks. So he captures those threads very, very well. But always going back to the fact that your initial moral corrosion happened because you were pursuing your career in a no-holds-barred way. You started making compromises, and later somehow this leads to stuff which is far, far from being as innocent as merely pursuing promotions, but actually gets out of hand. And then, of course, there's a denouement. He's very positive about journalists. I don't know, Ravi, I'm not so sure journalists are so good, but journalists tend to be the heroes and the people who unravel. So he salutes our journalists, and very much into technology, into software, into hacking into computers, into figuring out, looking at fingerprints in the computer programs. So it's fascinating for those of us who, again, as I said, we've spent so many of our hours of our day staring at, Microsoft Outlook or Office or those kinds of spreadsheets. You can relate to it. So thank you, Ravi, for writing about people like us, for romanticizing our lives a little bit more than we probably have, because that's good. We do need that. Thank you for being a first-rate thriller writer, because the way you build up the crescendo is just astonishing and very, very, very well done all the time. It is true when the journal says he's John Grisham of Indian banking, the fact of the matter is each of these ecosystems, be it banking, be it espionage, they have their own stories to tell, and it is within a context, within a framework, using certain vocabulary, certain situations, and you bring that all to life very, very well. I did point out to him when I called him after reading the book that his favorite hunting ground seems to be retail banking, and how driven by their desires for bonuses and promotions, people actually force unwary customers to do things that is not in their interests. But really, Ravi, most of the scams happen on the trading floor, as you know from the LIBOR scandal. So maybe in your next book, you want to look at some sleazy slime ball traders. I will leave that thought with you. There is always underlying sexual tension in all of his books. There's people making it out on the office floor, and various. I mean, again, we all know, or at least one person who's done it, right? We all know. So there's that kind of, hey, this grabs you, and I think that's the best part of reading Ravi, is that you can relate back, not identical, but very similar situations that all of us are aware of, and he appeals to the respect. He respects the readers. He said, hey, you're intelligent people, you'll relate to it, and that's why I think 100,000 readers or more are in love with you and are buying your books. Wish you all the best for this book and for many more books to come. Once again, thank you for having me here. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Definitely you've given us the grand pulse of the book. And now all you avid readers